The gunshot didn't hum or crackle or resonate like their energy weapons. It exploded, a brutal sound of thunder and fire that made even the armored Threx flinch. Commander Sorath Vane stood at the podium in the Axiom Academy's tiered amphitheater, his carapace dull with age, his uniform stripped of bright metals. He didn't speak. He let the sound hang in the alloy seats humming with alien body heat, let it echo through the jaws clicking and tails lashing behind him. 300 cadets from 12 species sat in rows that curved upward like a throat waiting to swallow sound. The Vorak cadet in the third row, Vane noted the chitinous plates catching the light, the thermal pit eyes still blinking from the noise, had stopped laughing. They all had. The betting pool scrawled on the Vorak's data slate, the wagers on how quickly the human would die, sat forgotten on his knee. Vane reached beneath the podium and lifted a dented, scorched metal case. He set it on the table with a heavy thunk. The sound echoed through the room like punctuation. On the lid, 2 words had been burned into the alloy, faded but readable, still here. 42 confirmed kills, Vane said. 1 reload. No exosuit, no AI, no backup. He paused. His claws clicked against the podium's edge, a stress-del he'd never trained away. You've all studied efficiency metrics. Kill ratios, survival indexes, tactical cohesion. Every metric has an outlier, a point so far from the curve that it breaks the graph. The amphitheater was silent. Even the ventilation hum seemed muted. You'll want to hear how this ends, Vane said. Trust me on that. He unlatched the case. Inside, resting on charred padding, sat a cracked helmet. The visor was spiderwebbed with impact fractures. Dark residue dried in seams that no solvent had ever cleaned. Vane lifted it with both hands, the way one might lift a child, and set it on the display node. The cadets leaned forward. The Sarathi recruit in the front row, her vocal stabilizer humming low, tilted her amphibious head. The Threx cadet who had opened the betting pool, whose tail had lashed with amusement 10 minutes ago, now held perfectly still. Vane touched the node. The amphitheater lights dimmed. The helmet's internal recorder activated. The footage opened on mud. Not the sterile combat zones the cadets trained in, but real mud, black, sucking, stinking of sulfur and decay. A man crawled through it on his elbows. His left hand was wrong. 2 fingers missing, gripping the rifle stock with a modified weld that left rust stains on the polymer. His helmet cam hung crooked, showing the world in tilted jumps. Sergeant Jace Mercer, Earth Infantry, 7th Drop Regiment. Frontier Pacification Campaigns. The words appeared as text overlay, standard military tagging, but the footage itself was anything but standard. Mercer dragged himself over a drainage gully. His right leg hung at an angle that made several cadets in the medical track shift in their seats. Compound fracture, the femur visible against torn fabric. No automed suite chirped. No suit injector deployed. He reached the gully's lip and rolled onto his back, staring at a sky the color of old bruises. Human, someone whispered behind Vane. Not a name, a slur. Vane didn't turn. He watched the cadets watch Mercer. Mercer pulled his rifle across his chest. The scope was cracked, a web of fractures splitting the lens. He worked the bolt with his 3-fingered hand, chambering a round that sounded like a door closing. Then he reached to his belt and drew his bayonet. The blade was standard issue, carbon steel, nothing the cadets hadn't seen in museum displays. But Mercer didn't use it as a weapon. He heated it. How the footage didn't show, maybe a chemical flare, maybe friction against rock until the metal glowed dull orange. He looked at his leg. He looked at the blade. He looked at the sky once more, as if checking for rescue, for drones, for anything that would make the next action unnecessary. Nothing came. He drove the heated steel into his own thigh. The sound wasn't in the recording. The helmet cam picked up only Mercer's breathing, ragged and rhythmic, the kind of breathing the cadets recognized from stress training, but never from actual self-inflicted wounds. He held the blade in place for 17 seconds. The cadets counted. Vane saw their lips moving. 17 seconds of cauterization, of a man burning his own wound closed while mud soaked his back, and his broken leg twitched against the gully wall. Then he passed out. The footage held on his stillness. Mud crept toward his helmet. A rain began, thin and acid, etching the lens. For a moment, the only movement was the Threx cadet's tail, which had begun to lash again, not with amusement, but with the nervous tick of a predator who has seen something that doesn't fit the hunt pattern. Mercer's eyes opened. No transition. One frame unconscious, the next awake, as if his body had rebooted without consulting his mind. He checked his rifle. 17 rounds in the magazine, 4 in the chamber, 21 total. He'd started with more. He'd lost some in the mud, some in the fall, some to the simple violence of being alive in a place that wanted him dead. He began to crawl again. The first Vorak patrol appeared at the gully's rim. 3 of them, moving in the pack hunt coordination the cadets studied in tactical theory. Pheromone sync made them move as one body with 3 heads. Their reflective mesh armor caught the acid rain and turned it to steam. Their thermal pit eyes scanned the depression, searching for heat signatures, for movement, for prey. Mercer was below the thermal line, soaked in cold mud, his body temperature dropping toward ambient. He waited. The cadets watched him wait. The Vorak above spoke in the clicking consonants that translation software rendered as tactical chatter, coordinates, sweep patterns, the mathematics of territory. Mercer rose to one knee. One shot. The first Vorak's knee joint exploded, the chitin parting like wet paper. The creature folded, its pheromone scream disrupting the sync. Mercer worked the bolt. Second shot. The second Vorak stumbled, neck exposed, and the round entered at the seam where chitin met flesh. Third shot. The third tried to turn, mesh flaring with defensive reflex, but Mercer had aimed for the thermal pit cluster, and the creature went down clawing at its own face. 3 shots, 3 kills, 9 seconds. Mercer didn't celebrate. He checked his magazine. 18 rounds. He began to crawl again, dragging his cauterized leg through mud that now held 3 bodies. The acid rain cleaned his rifle. The acid rain ate at his gloves. He didn't seem to notice. Vane paused the footage. The amphitheater lights rose slowly, letting the cadets blink, letting them remember where they were. Moonbase Korath 7. Alloy seats. Safe air. A lecture hall where human had been a punchline 10 minutes ago. Questions, Vane said. No one spoke. The Sarathi recruit raised her hand, then lowered it. The Vorak cadet who had led the betting pool stared at his data slate as if it belonged to someone else. The Threx cadet, Vane checked the roster in his mind, Kess, Flight 7, carapace still bright with youth, sat with her claws dug into the seat's padding, leaving marks that would need repair. Let me make this easier, Vane said. You're wondering why he didn't use the automed, why he didn't call for extraction, why he didn't simply die efficiently, the way your textbooks say unsupported infantry should die. He let the question settle. The answer is, he didn't have those options. Earth infantry doesn't carry automeds. They don't wear suits with injectors. They don't have backup. What they have is what you see. A rifle, a blade, a body that keeps moving until it stops. The lights dimmed again. The footage resumed. Mercer had reached a debris field, the wreckage of a drone, its auxiliary system still sparking against wet metal. He studied it with the methodical patience of a man checking a tool chest. He found the oxygen port, cracked it open, and jury-rigged a line to his helmet's failing seals. 10 minutes of breathable air. He didn't smile. He simply noted it, the way one might note that a door still had a hinge. The cadets watched him work with rusted tools, with fingers that shook from blood loss, with a body that should have been in shock 2 hours ago. They watched him calculate angles in mud, use drainage gullies as trenches, turn the wreckage of a flying machine into a life support system that would fail in 10 minutes. And they watched him keep moving. Vane's claw clicked against the podium. Once. Twice. He suppressed the memory of Delta 9, the campaign that had dulled his carapace, the 3 kilometers that had separated his position from Mercer's, the distance that had made him a witness only, a survivor who carried the guilt of not being there. The footage showed Mercer reaching a beacon, a standard relay scorched, dormant, its power cell cracked. Mercer opened it with the same bayonet he'd used to cauterize his leg. He rewired the burst transmitter manually, his three-fingered hand twisting connections that should have required a tech suite. He sent a ping, one burst, location data. No message, no voice, no plea. Just coordinates and the silence of a man who expected nothing but recorded his presence anyway. "Tell them to mark the ruins," Mercer whispered to no one. "I'm coming through." The cadets heard it. The amphitheater's acoustic design caught the whisper and amplified it, turned it into something that filled the tiered seats and the alloy hum and the clicking jaws. Vane watched Kess's carapace shift color, the Threk's stress response, dulling toward the gray of old warriors. The footage cut. Static hissed from the speakers, a sound like rain on a broken helmet. Vane stood in the silence. He didn't speak. He let the cadets sit with what they'd seen, with the mud and the bayonet and the whisper that wasn't a request, but a statement of fact. "That was the first 20 minutes, Vane said. "Shall I continue?" The Vorak cadet who had laughed first, Vane remembered his name now, Jorik, Flight 3, thermal pits still wide from the footage, nodded. Not the arrogant nod of a cadet demanding entertainment. The nod of a creature who had seen something that rewired its understanding of what combat meant. "Continue," Jorik said. His voice was barely audible. Vane touched the node. The lights dimmed. The footage resumed. Mercer was crawling again, the beacon behind him, his 10 minutes of oxygen ticking down in a helmet display that no one but he could see. The Vorak were hunting him now, not patrols, but packs, drawn by the pheromone scream of the dead. Mercer heard them before he saw them, the clicking sync of their movement cutting through the rain. He found a drainage channel, submerged himself in black water that smelled of sulfur and rot, and waited. 26 seconds. The cadets counted again. 26 seconds of held breath, of a broken man floating in poison water, of thermal pit eyes scanning the surface and finding nothing because Mercer had stopped being warm. The Vorak passed. Mercer rose. He didn't shoot. He let them pass, let them move into the kill zone he'd mapped in his mind, the geometry of terrain and patience that no textbook taught. When the last one cleared the channel's bend, he fired. Ankle shot. The Vorak stumbled. Neck shot. The Vorak fell. He worked the bolt. Another. Another. 4 rounds. 4 kills. 12 rounds remaining. He didn't check his leg. He didn't check his oxygen. He checked his angles, his exits, his fields of fire. He moved like a man who had already died and was simply refusing to lie down. The footage followed him through the debris field, past the drone wreckage, toward a ridge that overlooked a valley. The cadets could see what Mercer saw, the valley floor choked with Vorak advance units, the pheromone sink making them move like a single organism, the reflective mesh catching the acid rain and turning the whole formation into a shimmering wall of chitin and coordinated death. Mercer had 8 rounds, 1 grenade, a body that should have stopped 3 hours ago. He checked the grenade's fuse. 15 seconds. He looked at the valley. He looked at his rifle. He looked at his hands, the 3 fingers and the modified weld and the rust stains that had become part of his skin. Then he began to descend. The footage cut again. Vane raised the lights. The cadets sat in the brightness of the amphitheater on Moonbase Korath 7, surrounded by alloy seats and safe air, and the distant hum of a ventilation system that had never known acid rain. Vane touched the node. The lights dimmed. The footage resumed. Mercer was descending into the valley, not running, not limping, crawling down a slope of scree and acid-burned scrub, his broken leg trailing behind him like something he was trying to leave but couldn't. The helmet cam caught his face in profile, the set of his jaw, the way his eyes tracked the valley floor without blinking. He looked like a man reading a map he already knew by heart. The Vorak advance units moved below. Hundreds of them, maybe more. The pheromone sink made them flow like a single dark river between the ridges, their reflective mesh catching the acid rain and turning each soldier into a walking lantern. They were heading toward the ridge above, toward the pinned allies Mercer had pinged from the beacon, toward the last Earth infantry position on this side of the continent. Mercer reached a boulder at the valley's lip. He checked his rifle. 8 rounds. He checked the grenade. One fuse, 15 seconds already armed. He looked at the distance between himself and the nearest Vorak unit. 50 meters, maybe. The mesh would deflect a standard round. The seams at knee and elbow were vulnerable, but only if the target was stationary. Only if the shooter had time. He didn't have time. He had 8 rounds and a body that should have stopped hours ago. The cadets watched him calculate. They saw it in the way his head moved, the way his 3-fingered hand adjusted the grenade's grip, the way he looked once at the ridge behind him, the ridge where his allies waited, where the burst ping had gone, where help would not come because no help existed. Then he moved. He didn't crawl, he rolled. Down the slope, a broken man tumbling through scree, making noise, making heat, making himself into the thing the Vorak couldn't ignore. The first mesh flared as a thermal pit eye caught him. A pheromone scream went up. The river of chitin and coordinated death turned toward the sound. Mercer came to rest against a rock. He raised his rifle. One shot. A knee exploded. The Vorak fell, mesh flaring, pheromones shrieking disruption. 2 shots. Another knee, another seam. 3, 4. The mesh was learning, adapting, the reflective surface shifting to counter the angle. 5, 6, 7. Mercer fired into the mass, not aiming now, just creating gaps, creating confusion, creating a moment where the grenade could matter. He pulled the pin. He didn't throw it far. He threw it into the vent port of a downed transport, the hollow throat where the engine's heat still lingered. The fuse burned. The cadets counted with him, though they didn't know they were counting. 15 seconds. The Vorak closed, mesh raised, thermal pits wide with the hunt frenzy that was their strength and their flaw. The explosion wasn't fire. It was pressure and shrapnel and the sound of a machine dying hard. The transport's fuel cell caught. The blast rippled through the tight-packed formation, the pheromone sink turning confusion into panic, panic into rout. Mercer was thrown against the rock. The helmet cam went dark for 3 seconds. When it returned, he was crawling again, toward the blast crater, toward the gap he'd made in the line. 7 down, maybe more. The footage didn't linger on the count. It followed Mercer as he crawled through the crater's edge, his uniform burning in places, his modified weld glowing with heat, his 3-fingered hand still gripping the rifle though it was empty now. He had fired all 8 rounds. The grenade was spent. He had nothing left but momentum. He reached the far side of the crater. The Vorak were regrouping, the pheromone sink re-establishing, the river reforming around the rock of his resistance. He could see the ridge now, the allied position, the shapes of soldiers who watched through scopes and couldn't believe what they were seeing. A man crawling toward them through hell, leaving a trail that wasn't mud anymore. Mercer collapsed into the squad position. Hands reached for him, human hands, pulling him into the trench. He didn't speak. He handed his rifle to the nearest soldier, a private, 17 years old, face white with shock, and when the private checked the magazine, he found it empty. Mercer had fired his last round. He had crawled into the squad with nothing but his body and the grenade's echo. "Last loaded rifle," Mercer whispered. The helmet cam caught it, the way his voice had gone to gravel, the way his eyes were focused on something beyond the trench. "Take it. Hold the line." He stood. The private tried to pull him down, but Mercer was already moving, already rising, already becoming the thing he had been since the first shot. A man who had died hours ago and simply refused to lie down. He walked back toward the ridge, empty, unarmed. His left hand hung open, the 2 missing fingers making the gesture strange, incomplete. His right hand was a fist. He climbed the slope, his broken leg dragging, his cauterized wound reopening with each step, leaving a trail that the Vorak couldn't miss, that they didn't want to miss, that drew their eyes and their fire and their whole advancing mass toward the single point of defiance on the ridge. The camera hung crooked. Mercer had attached it to the wall before standing. The image showed him one broken soldier facing down a full advance, his body barely upright. One hand clenched into a fist, the other hung empty, fingers missing, no rifle left to grip. Behind him, smoke and ruin. In front, a sea of chitinous plates and thermal pit eyes. The Vorak line paused. 15 seconds. They didn't retreat. They opened fire. The footage flared white. When it returned, Mercer was still standing, but now the ridge was empty, bodies everywhere. He'd drawn their attention long enough. The allies above had fired down into the exposed flank. The line held. Mercer didn't fall. He died standing, his fist still closed, his eyes open, looking at something no one else could see. The timestamp read 54 minutes, 38 seconds. Oxygen, 0. Suit status, flatline. And still the camera recorded. Still the image held, as if the machine itself refused to look away. Vane stopped the footage. The amphitheater was silent. No one moved. The ventilation hummed, a sound like breathing in a room where no one breathed. He lifted the helmet from the node. He held it in both hands, the way he had at the beginning, and turned to face the cadets. His carapace seemed duller now, the age showing in the way he moved, the weight of Delta 9 in every joint. 312 confirmed enemy dead, Vane said. The words fell like stones into water. 57 mortally wounded. 1 man. 60 rounds. The numbers hung in the air. The cadets who had laughed at chemical guns sat with mouths open. The Threx cadet Kess hadn't moved, her claws still dug into the seat, her carapace the grey of old warriors. Jorik the Vorax stared at his data slate, the betting pool still visible, the wagers now reading like a cruel joke he hadn't meant to tell. For decades, Vane continued, your curriculum used sanitized footage, filtered engagements, tactical breakdowns. That was doctrine. Efficient, predictable. Earth broke doctrine. They fought with everything that could be held, thrown, burned, sharpened, or aimed. They turned terrain into weapons. They treated pain as an inconvenience, not a limit. He set the helmet back into the case. The scorched padding accepted it like a cradle. They ran cloning trials, neural pattern mapping. Every clone failed. Their bodies could match the template. Their minds couldn't. The reflexes were there. The accuracy was there. But not the thing that made Mercer walk back toward that ridge. Not the thing that made him hold the line when the line was already broken. Vane closed the case. The lid came down over still here, the words facing up, unreadable now but present, like a heartbeat under cloth. Any questions? Kess stood, her tail lashed once, a nervous tick, then held still. You were there, she said, not a question, a statement. Vane's claw clicked against the podium. Once. 3 kilometers from his position. Delta 9 campaign. I heard the burst ping. I saw the ridge go white. I did not reach him in time. The amphitheater held its breath. 300 cadets, 12 species, and the silence of a confession that had waited 2 centuries to be spoken. Why? Kess asked. Her voice was low, the Threx register for formal inquiry. Why did he do it? The beacon was sent. The Allies knew he was coming. He could have waited. He could have. He didn't wait, Vane said, because waiting is what you do when you believe rescue is possible. Mercer didn't believe in rescue. He believed in the line. The line doesn't move. The line doesn't retreat. The line holds until it breaks, and when it breaks, you become the line. He looked at the case, at the words burned into the lid. You don't run, you don't beg, you hold the line. The cadets sat in the silence. The alloy seats hummed with body heat, but no one moved. No one clicked a jaw or lashed a tail. The ventilation system pushed recycled air through the amphitheater, and it smelled of nothing, of safety, of a moon base where war was theory and death was a statistic. Kess didn't sit down. She looked at the case, at the helmet inside it, at the words that had never been read aloud. I want to go there, she said. Where? Earth, the quarantine perimeter. I want to see the line. Vane studied her. The bright carapace of youth, the claws that had dug into the seat, the tail that lashed once and held still. The soul gate doesn't open for visitors. It doesn't open for anyone. Earth sealed itself behind that network 200 years ago. They chose isolation. They chose to become myth rather than let the galaxy see what they are. Then I'll wait, Kess said. At the perimeter, at the gate. I'll wait until it opens, or until I understand why it never does. Vane looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached beneath the podium and withdrew a data crystal, small and blue and warm from his body heat. He held it out. This is the burst ping Mercer sent. The coordinates. The silence that followed. Take it. When you reach the perimeter, hold it to the gate. If the network still recognizes its own, it will answer. Kess took the crystal. Her claws closed around it, and for a moment her carapace shifted color, brightening toward the blue of Threk's morning, then settling into something new. Something that wasn't grief and wasn't hope, but existed in the space between them. The crystal was warm against Kess's palm as she stepped off the transport at the Solgate relay station. Not warm from her body, from something inside it, a resonance that hummed at a frequency her Threk's hearing couldn't quite place. The station was dormant, its power cells cracked, its corridors empty of the diplomatic traffic that had once flowed between Earth and the galaxy. 2 centuries of silence had settled into the metal like dust. She walked to the observation deck. The gate hung in the void beyond the station's broken windows, a ring of light that pulsed once every several minutes, a heartbeat in deep sleep. Earth was visible through it, blue and white and impossibly small, the way a memory looks when held at arm's length. Kess pressed the crystal to the glass. Nothing. She pressed it to the comm panel. Nothing. She pressed it to her own chest, where her heart beat against the carapace, and whispered the coordinates Mercer had sent. The ones that had marked the ruins. The ones that had said, "I'm coming through." The gate pulsed. Once. Twice. A third time, and the rhythm changed, faster, sharper, a response that wasn't automated but was something else, something that recognized the signal and chose to answer. The ring of light widened. A path opened, not the full aperture of a military convoy, but a narrow channel, a door held ajar by an unseen hand. Cass stepped through. Gravity caught her. Earth gravity, heavier than Korath 7, pulling at her joints and her tail, and the carapace that had never been designed for this weight. She stumbled, caught herself, and looked up at a sky that was blue without filters, at clouds that moved without programmed patterns, at a horizon that curved with the slow indifference of a world that had never needed to justify its existence. The gate closed behind her, not with the finality of a prison, but with the quiet click of a door that knew she would not be the last to knock. She stood on a coastal cliff. Knee-high grass swayed in a wind that smelled of salt and something older, something that might have been the mineral bite of iron-filtered light, or might have been the memory of chemical thunder. Below, waves broke against rocks that had watched centuries pass without comment. A path led down to a rusted gate, and beyond the gate, a low building of concrete and glass that had been new when the quarantine was young and was old now in a way that made it seem permanent. Kess walked. The grass whispered against her legs. The wind carried sounds, birds, insects, the distant mechanical rhythm of something that might have been a generator or might have been a heart. She reached the gate. It was locked, but the lock was rusted, and when she pushed, the metal gave way with a sound like a sigh. The building's door stood open. Inside, a single room, a table, a chair, and on the wall, a screen that flickered to life as she entered, sensing her body heat, her movement, the crystal still clutched in her hand. The screen showed a face. Human male, older than the footage she had seen, but with the same jaw, the same eyes that looked at something no one else could see. The same missing fingers, though this hand had aged, the modified weld replaced with something cleaner, the rust stains gone but the grip unchanged. "You're not the first to knock," the man said. His voice was gravel like Mercer's whisper, but deeper, worn by decades of answering a door that almost no one reached. "But you're the first in 17 years. The crystal's still warm. That means you didn't find it. You were given it." Kess held up the crystal. Commander Vane, Delta 9 campaign. He was 3 kilometers away. The man's eyes changed, not with surprise, with recognition, as if a debt he had carried for 2 centuries had finally come due. Sorath Vane. He sent the extraction team that arrived too late. He sent the burial detail that found the camera still recording. He sent the case back to Earth with the words burned on the lid. The man paused. He never came himself. "He couldn't," Kess said. "The quarantine." "The quarantine was our choice," the man said. "Not yours. We sealed the gates from the inside. We chose to become myth rather than let the galaxy see what we are. Because when we fight, we don't leave survivors. And when we don't fight, we don't know how to be anything else." He stood. Kes saw now that he wore a uniform, old but maintained, the seventh drop insignia faded on the shoulder. He moved to a cabinet and opened it. Inside, rows of cases identical to the one Vane had shown, each with words burned on the lid. Still here, still here, still here. Mercer wasn't unique, the man said. He was standard. The seventh drop standard. Every soldier in that regiment did what he did, or tried to, or died trying. The footage you saw, that's not the exception. That's the training tape. We show it to recruits on their first day. We show them the man who crawled through mud with a compound fracture, who cauterized his own leg with a heated bayonet, who walked back toward the ridge with nothing but a fist and a refusal. And we tell them, this is the minimum. This is where you start. Kes felt the weight of the room, the gravity, the cases on the wall, the years of silence that had accumulated like sediment. Then, why the quarantine? If this is standard, why hide? The man turned. His eyes held something that wasn't pride and wasn't shame, but existed in the space between them, the same space Kess's carapace had shifted into when she took the crystal. Because standard means repeatable. Because the galaxy doesn't need soldiers who hold the line. The galaxy needs diplomats, traders, explorers, people who can walk away from a fight. We can't. It's not in us. We tried. We opened the gates, sent ambassadors, established trade routes. And every time, someone pushed, and someone pushed back, and the line formed, and we held it. We held it until there was nothing left but the holding. So we sealed the gates. We chose to be myth. We chose to let you wonder what we were, rather than show you what we are and watch you become afraid. He reached into the cabinet and took down one of the cases. Not Mercer's, another, identical, the words faded, the scorch marks older. This one held a woman who held a bridge for 6 hours against a Sarathi armored column. She had a broken rifle and a pocket of grenades that didn't work. She threw rocks. She threw herself. The bridge held. The column went around. She died standing like Mercer, like they all do, because falling is not in the manual. He set the case on the table. You want to understand the line. The line isn't a place. It isn't a ridge or a bridge or a trench. The line is the moment when everything else is gone, hope, rescue, ammunition, reason, and you still don't move. You stand. You hold. You become the thing that doesn't break, because if you break, everything behind you breaks too. Mercer understood that. Vane understood it from 3 kilometers away. And now you understand it, or you will, or you'll leave and never come back. Kes looked at the case, at the words, at the man who had answered a door that hadn't been opened in 17 years, who carried the weight of a standard that was also a curse. I want to stay, she said. The man studied her. His eyes moved over her carapace, her claws, her tail, the Threx form that had never been designed for Earth gravity or Earth grief. Why? Because I watched Mercer walk back toward that ridge, Kes said. And I watched Vane carry the guilt of not walking with him, and I don't want to be either. I want to be the one who stands at the line before it breaks. I want to learn what that means. The man was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew a key, old and brass and worn smooth by decades of handling. He pressed it into Kess's palm, the metal cold against her scales, the weight of it surprising in its simplicity. The gate responds to the crystal, he said, but the door responds to this. There's a room down the hall. Bed, water, a window that faces the cliff. Stay as long as you need. Leave when you must. The line doesn't demand your life. It only demands that you know what it costs. Kes closed her fingers around the key, around the crystal, around the two objects that had traveled 2 centuries and 3 kilometers and the space between myth and truth to reach her hand. She felt the weight of them, the warmth of the crystal, the cold of the key, and understood that they were the same thing viewed from different sides. She walked to the window. The cliff fell away below, the grass swaying, the waves breaking, the gate pulsing in the distance with a rhythm that had become familiar, almost human. She thought of Mercer crawling through mud, of Vane's claws clicking against the podium, of the cadets who had laughed and then stopped laughing and then sat in silence that was the beginning of something else. The man had returned to his chair, to his screen, to his vigil. Kes watched the gate pulse, and she waited, and she knew that the door would open again, that someone else would come with a crystal or a question or a need to understand what the line meant. And she would be there, standing at the threshold, neither Mercer nor Vane, but something new, something that had learned from both and chosen to stay. The sun set over the ocean. The room darkened. The screen flickered, showing footage she had already seen, would see again, the man crawling through mud with a broken leg and a heated bayonet and a refusal that had outlasted empires. Kess watched it in the dark, the key in her hand, the crystal warm against her chest, and she did not look away. Kess woke to the sound of rain on glass. Not acid rain, earth rain, water that fell without burning, that smelled of salt and grass, and something clean that she had no name for in Threx. She lay in the bed the man had offered, the key cold on the table beside her, the crystal warm against her chest where she had held it through the night. She dressed in the grey light of dawn. The uniform the man had left, seventh drop, faded, too small for her frame, hung on the door like a question. She didn't wear it. She wore her own academy greys, the Axiom insignia still bright on the shoulder, and walked down the hall to the room where the man sat vigil. The screen was dark. The cases on the wall caught the morning light, each lid facing outward, each word visible. Still here, still here, still here. The man looked up as she entered, his eyes moving over her carapace, her claws, her tail, the Threx form that had spent the night on Earth gravity and had not broken. "You stayed," he said. "I stayed." He nodded, as if this answered a question he had stopped asking decades ago. He reached into the cabinet and took down a case she hadn't seen, newer, the scorch marks fresh, the words burned deeper than the others. He set it on the table between them. "This came in last month," he said. The soul gate pulsed. A burst transmission, no coordinates, no voice. Just the words burned into the casing the way we burn them here, the way Mercer burned them, the way they all do when there's no one left to write the report. Kess looked at the case, at the words, at the scorch marks that were still black, still sharp, still holding the heat of whatever had made them. "Who?" The man didn't answer. He opened the lid. Inside, a helmet, not cracked like Mercer's, intact, the visor clear. The comm unit still active, blinking a slow red pulse that matched the rhythm of the gate outside, the heartbeat in deep sleep. "Vane," the man said. "Commander Sorath Vane, Delta 9 survivor. The guilt he carried, it finally outweighed the distance. He took a transport to the perimeter. He knocked. The gate opened, the way it opens for the crystal, for the key, for anyone who knows the cost of standing at the line. He stepped through. He walked to the cliff. He sat where you're sitting now, and he told me what I already knew, that he was 3 kilometers away, that he heard the burst ping, that he didn't move, that he let Mercer hold the line alone." The man closed the lid. The words faced up, "Still here." "He didn't stay," the man said. "He couldn't. The Academy needed him, or he thought it did, or he couldn't bear the weight of a world where the line was real and he had failed to stand at it. He went back through the gate. He sent the case. He sent the helmet. And he went back to teaching cadets who laugh at human soldiers, showing them footage that breaks the graph, hoping that one of them would do what he couldn't." Cass felt the crystal in her pocket, the key on the table, the weight of 2 centuries and 3 kilometers and the space between guilt and redemption. "I want to see him," she said. "You can't. The gate doesn't open for return journeys. Not for us. Not for anyone who leaves after they enter. The quarantine works both ways. We sealed ourselves in, and we sealed the galaxy out. Vane knew that. He chose to go back. He chose to keep teaching, keep carrying, keep hoping that someone else would cross the line he couldn't hold. Kess stood. She walked to the window. The cliff fell away below, the grass swaying, the waves breaking, the gate pulsing in the distance with a rhythm that had become her own heartbeat. She thought of Vane at the podium, his claws clicking, his carapace dull with age, his voice saying I did not reach him in time. She thought of Mercer crawling through mud, of the heated bayonet, of the ridge and the empty rifle and the fist that stayed closed. She turned back to the man. "Then I'll be the one who stays. I'll stand at the line. I'll answer the door when someone else knocks." The man studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew a second key, identical to the first, worn smooth by decades of handling. He pressed it into her palm, the metal cold against her scales, the weight of it surprising in its simplicity. "This is the key to the gate," he said. "Not the soul gate, the inner gate, the one that leads to the training grounds, the ones where we teach recruits what the line means, where we show them Mercer and Vane and all the others, where we make them crawl through mud with broken legs and heated bayonets and the understanding that the line doesn't move. You want to stand at it, you have to learn it first." Kess closed her fingers around the key, around the crystal, around the two objects that had traveled 2 centuries and 3 kilometers and the space between myth and truth to reach her hand. She understood now what Vane had given her. Not just a crystal, not just coordinates. A choice. The same choice Mercer had made when he walked back toward the ridge. The same choice Vane had failed to make and had spent 2 centuries trying to give to someone else. "I'll learn," she said. The man nodded. He stood. He walked to the wall of cases and ran his hand along them, the three-fingered hand that matched Mercer's, that matched Vane's, that matched every soldier who had held the line, and left the words burned behind them. "Then let's begin," he said. He opened the door. Beyond it, a path led down to the training grounds, to the mud and the rain and the gravity that pulled at every step. Kess walked through, her tail lashing once, a nervous tick, then holding still. The man followed, closing the door behind them, leaving the cases on the wall to catch the morning light, the words facing outward, the promise intact. The gate pulsed in the distance. The waves broke on the rocks. The grass swayed in a wind that smelled of salt and something older, something that had been there before the quarantine, before the wars, before the line was drawn. Kess walked toward the training grounds, the key in her hand, the crystal warm against her chest, and she did not look back. Vane stood at the podium on Moonbase Korath 7. The amphitheater was empty, the cadets gone to their quarters, the alloy seats cold in the absence of body heat. He opened the case, Mercer's case, the one he had kept, the one he had shown, the one he had sent back to Earth with the helmet and the words and the weight of his guilt. The lid came down. Still here faced up, faded, readable, the same words that faced outward on the wall of cases on Earth. The same words that burned on every helmet of every soldier who had held the line and died standing. Vane placed his claw on the words. Once, twice, a third time, and he held it there, feeling the scorch marks, the heat that had faded but never disappeared, the promise that outlasted empires and quarantines, and the distance between a man who held the line and a man who watched from 3 kilometers away. He closed the case. He locked it with 2 deliberate motions. He set it back on the shelf where it belonged, where it would wait, where it would still be when the next cadet laughed, and the next lesson began, and the next choice was offered to someone who might, finally, understand what the line meant. The ventilation hummed. The alloy seats waited. The case sat on the shelf, the words facing out, the promise unbroken. Outside, the soul gate pulsed. Once, twice, a third time, and the rhythm changed, faster, sharper, a response that wasn't automated but was something else, something that recognized the signal and chose to answer. The line held.